Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Explorer Classroom Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski from National Geographic, and I will be your host for today. And in fact, I know many of you are probably starting to log in right now and expecting that we'll be hanging out with Grace Young today, but unfortunately, Grace isn't going to be able to make today's Hangout. So we've had to do kind of a little last-minute change of events, and I am going to be the guest for today as well. So anybody who's just tuning in today, this month we are celebrating our ocean. So talking to scientists and explorers from all over the world who've dedicated their life to protecting our oceans, to researching them. As many of you know in your classrooms, we have not been very good stewards of our ocean. We've filled it with plastic. We've overfished. Climate change is affecting our coral reefs. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to protect our ocean. And even if you live very far from the ocean, it still has an impact on your everyday life. So what I want to do is take a quick minute and share my screen. I want to give the classrooms a feel for where everyone's joining us from today. So we're going to get this little map up here in just a moment. There we go. All right, you should be seeing my screen loading up now. There it goes. All right, so you've got this map here. I am in Elora, Ontario, a little village just outside of Toronto in Canada. As we start to back up a little bit more, we can get a perspective of some of our other classrooms. So we have classes joining us in Cambridge, Ontario, another class in Charlotte Lake here in Ontario as well. Oh, it looks like the map's not happy with me. There we go. Just loading a little bit slow. Let's back out one more. There we go. We've got some classrooms joining us in Virginia, a couple classrooms joining us in New Jersey today. We've got a classroom joining us in Connecticut, and we've got another classroom joining us in Missouri. So lots of great classrooms joining us from different places around North America today. So as I do come back from that share screen, I want to remind any classrooms who are tuning in via YouTube, let us know where you're watching from. Send in some questions via the chat sidebar, and we will definitely work some of those in. And then any classroom, whether you're watching us live or you're tuning in via YouTube, take some pictures, post them on Twitter, hashtag Explorer Classroom, tag at Nat Geo Education. We love to see classrooms in action. So once again, an apology to any classrooms who are tuning in, expecting Grace Young. Something happened this morning, and at the last minute, we've had to do a change of plan. So I'm going to host today's event. My name's Joe Grabowski. I obviously host Explorer Classroom. I'm also an explorer with National Geographic, so I've had the pleasure of diving in some really cool places all around the world. Recently, I was on an ocean expedition on the exploration vessel Nautilus, Bob Ballard ship, and I also had a trip to the Galapagos recently. So we're going to share a little bit of my adventures, and then I'd love to have some classrooms fire away with some questions. So let's get that share screen going one more time. There we go. And then let's find my presentation. There it is. So I'm going to go full screen. If for any reason you don't see it, just let me know. But we should be going full screen momentarily, and we will get things started. So this first picture that's going to load up, it is a special picture because it's the first time I was ever diving. So I lived in Australia in 2007 for a year. And while I was living there, that's where I started diving. So my first dive ever was on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. You may know it as the largest reef system on the planet. It extends for thousands of kilometers along the coast of Queensland and Australia. It's not one big structure. It's made up of thousands of tiny reefs and islands. Pretty amazing place. So not a bad spot for your first dive. So I'm happy I have this picture to kind of commemorate the first time I was ever diving. Now, sometimes I go free diving, so I don't bring a tank with me. I just use my mask and snorkel and fins. And in fact, this is an example of one time when I was in Fraser Island, this beautiful island in Australia, and this is a lake called Lake Mckenzie. So I dove down about 30 feet, and there were all these freshwater turtles sitting in the mud along the bottom. So I brought this one up for a closer look, and of course, I let the turtle go back down where it wanted to be. And sometimes I can get a little silly underwater. So this is a training lake in Ontario, not too far from where I live, and someone had thrown an old bike in. So I tried a little scuba cycling. Sometimes you need to try new sports. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to ride a bike underwater. Now, while I lived in Australia, I got to go on some pretty amazing dives and see some pretty cool things. So a few examples here. This is a giant clam. that I found on the reef. And so it's hard to tell from the picture, but this clam, if you have a meter stick or a yardstick in your classroom, that's how long this clam was. So up here in Canada, we're used to clams that are a couple inches long. So seeing one that was a whole meter long was pretty incredible. Now we've got this beautiful green sea turtle here. So this is a healthy coral reef. You can see all these beautiful, vibrant colors in behind, lots of different species of coral. And then we've got this beautiful green sea turtle. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, the sea turtle doesn't look very green, but actually they get their name from their fat. So their fat, if we could look inside that sea turtle, has a greenish tinge because of all the algae and seagrass that they do eat. So there's 7 species of sea turtles around the world, and unfortunately, they're all threatened or endangered due to our activities in the ocean. We've got a spotted stingray here, just kind of hiding out down near the bottom of the reef. And then I love finding little things. So a lot of people are looking out for the big things, but if you look around, you look in the cracks and the crevices and on the kelp and such, you can find amazing sea creatures. So this is a group called the nudibranchs, and I love the nudibranchs. Their name means naked lungs. So nudibranch means naked lungs, and you can see why they get that name. You can see at the back here, these little frills are basically its lungs. This is where it exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide with the water. And there's so many different colors and varieties of these species, and they use their bright colors to warn predators. You know, if you eat us, you're not going to feel very good. We're pretty toxic. So this is just one example of hundreds of amazing different colors and varieties of nudibranchs you can find if you're observant on the coral reef. Here's a cuttlefish. I always love seeing cuttlefish. This one here was maybe about a foot long, but off the coast of Sydney in Australia, they can be up to a meter, so up to a yardstick, these cuttlefish. They've even been known, they're super curious and smart, they've even been known to grab regulators out of divers' mouths because they're curious and trying to figure out, what is this thing? Now, you do have to be careful when you dive. This here is a stonefish, and it doesn't look like much. If I wasn't shining a light on it, it would blend right in with the bottom. It would look just like a rock, beautiful camouflage, but they're one of the most venomous creatures in the ocean. So all these spines up top here, you do not want to touch one of those by accident. Got to be careful where you put your hands on the coral reef. Very toxic and strong enough to even potentially kill a human. So yeah, always have to be a little bit careful when you're diving on the coral reef. And here's an example of some of the boats that we use. So this is just a little dive boat. I think there were about 8 of us divers this day. This is on a little island off the coast of Mexico called Cozumel. So beautiful island, lots of great diving around it. And this is an example of one of the boats that we'd use to go out. And again, it pays to look inside of things. So this is a sponge. This purple thing is a sponge that I looked inside of. And sponges are amazing animals because they're animals with no heart, no lungs, no brain, no nervous system. They filter tons and tons of water to get bacteria and other things out of the water. Pretty amazing animals. And inside of this one was an arrow crab. You can see this arrow crab is pretty darn curious, reaching out towards the camera, trying to figure out what's going on. What's looking in at me? Sometimes we dive in cave environments. Sometimes at the bottom of coral reefs, there can be little cave systems that you can go kind of in and out of. So I'm following a group of divers into one here. And then again, when you look inside of the little cracks and crevices, you never know what you're going to see. So this is a snowflake eel. And this eel wasn't too happy I found it. So I just took a nice picture and then let the eel get back to its business. Now, sometimes you see sharks, and sharks are my favorite thing to see underwater. Now, a lot of people might be thinking, well, sharks, that sounds kind of scary, but in reality, I think sharks have more to fear from us than we do of them. So each year we remove 75 to 100 million sharks from our oceans, whether they're caught by accident in nets through bycatch, or they are taken for their fins for shark fin soup. So some populations of sharks around the world have dropped as much as 90%. So at the end of the day, I think sharks have a lot more to fear from humans than we do of them. And this is a nurse shark. So this nurse shark is chilling out in an underwater cave. It's nocturnal, so it's going to come out at night and it's going to hunt. So for now, it's just hanging out at the bottom, just relaxing. Now, when you dive, sometimes you find endemic species. And endemic is a big fancy word for found nowhere else on the planet. So around the island of Cozumel, you can find these splendid toadfish. Really cool fish, found nowhere else on the planet. So really lucky to get to see this one and get a cool picture of it. Another species of sea turtle. This is the hawksbill sea turtle. You can see on the front of its mouth, it's got that little hook. Looks almost like the beak of a hawk, where it gets its name. And then diving at night is one of my favorite things to do. There's nothing better than when the sun goes down, jumping into the water, sinking into the waves, total darkness, a little spotlight in your hand, and the night crew is out. The nocturnal animals are out. Lobsters, crabs, the sharks are cruising around. And then you get to see octopus. So this octopus was hunting on the reef. This is the same octopus in each of these pictures. It's pouncing on little things. It's changing colors, changing shape. Really neat to be able to follow this octopus and watch it do its thing on the bottom. Now, shipwrecks. I love diving on shipwrecks. I'm certified to dive on shipwrecks. I dive in shipwrecks all over the place, especially in the Great Lakes. Here in Canada, they're deep, they're cold, they're very well preserved. We go inside of them sometimes, so really neat to be able to go down and dive on some of these shipwrecks. You can see in this one, we're making our way down a shipwreck. This is me right here. That light shining, that's me right there. And then if we go further, this is at the bottom of the wreck. This is the back of the ship, the stern. We're 155 feet deep here, checking out this wreck. The water is cold, cold, cold. You can see it's starting to get a little darker. The sunlight doesn't reach as far. And then here's another picture. I always dive with a buddy. This is my dive buddy Rich here in this picture. This is me. And you dive with a buddy because if something goes wrong with your gear, you can share air. You can share air and make sure you get back up to the surface. You see this yellow hose here. This is my backup. This is my octopus. This is a second regulator. If something goes wrong with my buddy's air, I can pull this off and share it with him, and then we can get to the surface safely together. So it's always important to dive with a buddy. Here's a shipwreck called the Arabia. Just a beautiful shipwreck sitting about 118 feet deep. It's made of wood. It sank over 100 years ago in a storm. And look how well preserved it is, thanks to the cold water. It doesn't let the bacteria eat away at the wood of the ship like it would in the ocean. Now, I was in the Bahamas recently doing some shark diving. A little island group called Bimini off the coast of Florida. And this is a stingray. So stingrays are related to sharks. They're in the same family. And sometimes they're called flat sharks because, well, they look like a flattened shark a little bit. And they're made of the same thing. Their bones are made of cartilage, just like sharks, just like your nose, just like your ear. That's the same thing that the skeleton of a stingray and a shark are made of. So this stingray is called the blanket. And then the next picture, you're going to see why she gets that name. So you can see I'm here. That's my wife, Elizabeth, on the left. My little guy, Finn, he was 2 at the time. He's 6 now, so he's a lot older. But you can see why she gets the name blanket. She's getting right up on my legs there. Pretty curious. There's a shark lab in Bimini, a pretty famous shark lab. So we went out to the shark pens. You can see Finn again. He's sitting on he's sitting on a little raft there. And then this is a baby lemon shark. So they capture the lemon sharks for a couple days. They take a blood sample, they tag them so they can recognize them later, and then they let them go. In fact, I'm wearing the same shirt that day that I'm wearing today. That's kind of cool. This is Caribbean reef shark. So we pulled up to a spot. We threw some squid into the water. Before we knew it, we had 15 of these beautiful Caribbean reef sharks swimming around the boat. And then I jumped in with them and had a really good free dive with them. And I've got a little video here I'm going to share of what it's like to kind of jump into the water with some of these Caribbean reef sharks. Let's see if I can find the play button here. There it is. All right, so on the back of the boat, you saw one just go by my fins. And here we go. So really cool sharks, maybe 4, 5, 6 feet long, depending on which shark it was. You can see they're curious. They come and kind of take a look. What's this? And then they kind of just go about their business. So always fun to get in the water, take some pictures, see some sharks. Beautiful, beautiful creatures. All right. So the main reason I was in Bimini was to dive with these guys. These are great hammerheads. These ones were 10 to 12 feet long. I spent 6 hours over 2 days diving with these great hammerheads. So they migrate all over the place, and they spend a portion of the year in Bimini. So here's a great shot head-on of the hammerhead coming to check us out. You can see they even smile for the camera when they swim by, which is pretty awesome. This is rush hour in Bimini. We've got 3 hammerheads cruising in front. And then, of course, we've got one more smile. And I've got a little video clip I want to share with you as well of diving with the hammerheads. So all along the bottom are nurse sharks. You can see the nurse sharks sitting at the bottom. They're curious. They're wondering what's going on. And then the hammerhead sharks come in one by one by one to hang out. Really cool to be so close. No cage, just hanging out with these amazing sharks. Sharks have a bad reputation of being these mindless predators, but it's just not true. You can see they're super curious. They get in really close. All right, a little taste of some hammerhead diving. So the last little thing I want to share with you today is last October, I spent about 2 weeks on board the exploration vessel Nautilus. We were in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary off the coast of California. We were doing some deep sea research using robots, underwater ROVs, up to 3 kilometers deep, exploring parts of the ocean nobody's ever explored before. So it was a ton of fun, and we were able to broadcast everything we did with the robots live to the world. Anybody could tune in and see what we were up to. So of course, before I started, I had to do some scuba diving. So this is kelp forests off the coast of California. You can see it doesn't look like much, but this is 30, 40, even 50 feet high. This kelp, it's fast growing, creates these forests that are full of life and biodiversity. So we jumped into the water. I got a little video here in the kelp forest. So this is me over here, and this is another explorer. His name's Tim White, and we're flying the National Geographic flag in the kelp forest, because why not? So lots of fun diving in the kelp forest. We spent a little time checking out the redwood forests, some of the oldest and biggest trees in the world. And then here she is, the exploration vessel Nautilus. We had a crew of over 30 scientists, ROV pilots, navigators on board. We had the robots, of course. There was the crew that runs the ship. It was a ton of fun to spend 2 weeks on board the Nautilus. We left from San Francisco. We're sailing out under the Golden Gate Bridge here. There's another shot. And then here it is. I'm going to let this video play while I talk about it. This is one of the ROVs. This is Hercules. Let's get that volume turned down a bit. So Hercules is 5,000 pounds, covered in high-definition cameras, lights. It has all kinds of sampling containers. We can take samples and bring them back up to the surface for the scientists. So we're taking it over on a crane, getting ready to drop Hercules into the water. Hercules can be in the water for over 30 hours on a dive. It's controlled by remote controls, very similar to a video game, actually. Lots of video screens to see what Hercules sees. And we can broadcast all of this live to the world while Hercules is exploring at the bottom of the ocean. So you can see lots of people getting Hercules ready to go into the water. This is the fiber optic cable connecting the signal for us. So there we go. Hercules is slowly being lowered into the water and won't surface for another 36 hours before Hercules will come back up to the surface. So very cool. All right, hitting the water and slowly disappearing. Okay. So jumping ahead, let's take a look at what we saw. So we've got a few pictures here to share. This is a sea spider. It may not look very big. We're 3 kilometers down right now. These lasers here are 10 centimeters apart. So we use these to measure how big things are in the deep ocean. And so this sea spider will be about 1 foot in diameter, looking at those lasers. Here are some sea cucumber hanging out. There's a couple of urchins there as well. So a lot of the nutrients come from the surface. There's something called marine snow. So plankton and zooplankton, when it dies, it sinks to the bottom. It's like a little snow, and that provides a lot of nutrients. Whales and other big creatures, when they die, they sink to the bottom. That provides a lot of nutrients. And these are all crowded around, these sea pigs and urchins are crowded around a piece of kelp that drifted out, sank to the bottom. And so it's like a little buffet for them 3 kilometers down. Here's a lizardfish. They're totally blind. They don't need to see in the dark. They can sense the movement of fish around them. And then they're ambush predators. So a fish swims over top and bam, it'll disappear into that big mouth. And even in the middle of the ocean, 3 kilometers down, you find evidence of human activity. We found fishing nets, we found old balloons, we found cans and paint cans and pop cans. So even far away from the shore, we still find evidence of our activities. Here's Hercules taking some samples. So using that manipulator arm to take a sample of a sponge to put in a container and bring to the surface for us. And there is so much life in the deep sea. There's sea anemones, there's sea cucumbers like this purple one here. Here's an acorn worm. There's deep sea coral, there's floating cryonids. So the deep sea is a place that is full of life. And we're just scratching the surface of exploring it. We've got better maps of the moon, of Mars than we do of our ocean. We've explored about 5% of the ocean. We've mapped maybe 15%. There is so much left to explore and discover in our oceans. And the last little clip I want to share with you today, I love this clip. We get to see some pretty cool things. So this is the camera on Hercules. And we are looking at a Dumbo octopus, also called an umbrella octopus. So you're going to see why it gets those names. So Dumbo, those fins up top, they look like ears from the elephant from the Disney movie. And then in a second, we're going to get a little taste of why it's also called a umbrella octopus.
Changing color? Well, the iris went down a little bit. Yeah. I'm trying to expose for the...
So the thing is, we don't know if this is rare. We don't know if this is a rare experience because we've explored so little of our deep ocean. Are there tons of these? Are there a few? We just don't know. You can see, by the way, the tentacles are connected. That's where that umbrella nickname comes from. Really cool.
Look at that hood. I can see it ripple. That's great. The whole mantle there.
All right. I think I can share one more quick clip. This is same spot, Davidson Seamount. We're 3 kilometers deep, exploring a place nobody has before, and we started seeing these octopus. We started seeing all of these octopus turned upside down, and we found that they were protecting eggs. They were brooding their eggs. And so first we saw a dozen of them, and then more and more and more, until by the end, we had seen thousands of these octopus all turned upside down in the bottom of the ocean, protecting their eggs. They could be doing this for 2 to 4 years before those eggs will finally hatch. So we found the deepest and largest colony of brooding octopus on the planet. So pretty amazing. There's so many things like this left to be discovered in the deep sea, and there may be spots where there's even more doing this exact same thing. We just don't know. This is just the biggest and deepest that we've found so far. So that's what's so exciting about our oceans, is we need to protect them so that we can see some of these amazing, amazing things. We barely scratched the surface. There's so much left we need to know, to understand, so many new species left to be discovered. Our oceans are pretty important to our planet. We definitely need to protect them, to protect things like this. All right. Well, I'm going to stop my screen share for now. Let me get back to our group. And I think it's about time that we take a little bit of Q&A action. So let's get back there. Let's stop that screen share. All right, so I should be coming back now. Let's meet some of our classrooms. I'd love to take your questions, whether it's about the ocean, about expeditions I've been on, about whatever you like, scuba diving. I am more than happy to take and answer any questions that you might have. So let's see, let's get started here. Let's go to Mrs. DeMaio's grade 2 class. So I'm going to turn their microphone on. They're hanging out with us today in Connecticut. How are we doing today, Connecticut?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Well, thanks so much for hanging out today. And I'd love to steal a question.
How did you get into working to National Geographic, and how long have you been working there?
Okay, very cool. So I grew up reading National Geographic. A lot of their explorers and scientists were some of my heroes growing up. I loved learning about places all over the world from reading those yellow bordered magazines. And I actually started my own organization called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So I connect classrooms with scientists and explorers and adventurers and conservationists from all over the world for events just like this. And so I started working with National Geographic. They were interested and excited about the project. I became an emerging explorer with them in 2017. And then I've been a fellow with them for the last 2 years with the National Geographic. And we started this program, the Explorer Classroom Program, where we connect National Geographic explorers and scientists with classrooms just like yours for events just like this. And we do a lot of them. So they're a ton of fun. And then along the way, I've been able to go on a few cool little expeditions as well. So it's been a lot of fun hanging out as an explorer and a fellow with National Geographic. Great question. Let's see. Let's go to Mrs. Finn's group. They're hanging out in Freehold, New Jersey. Let's get that microphone turned on. Looks like it's some grade 4s hanging out with us today.
Good.
How we doing, Freehold?
Good.
All right. Awesome. Who's got a question?
Big voice. Go ahead, Samantha.
Is there ever a time when you, like, if the robot goes down to the ocean and it like sits on and it goes down and like there's a place underneath?
It gets stuck.
Like it, not like it's stuck, but like it sits on a rock, but it's not a rock. It's like a gas.
So it gets lost? Are you asking if it ever gets?
I think, are you talking about hydrothermal vents?
Yes.
Okay, very cool. So great question. So I can answer both those questions. The one about getting stuck, that's something that the pilots worry about a lot because there's overhangs, there's discarded fishing nets left at the bottom. So imagine having a robot on a tether 3 kilometers underwater. You do not want to get it stuck because getting it back will not be easy if you get it back at all. So the ROV pilots are definitely very careful when they're cruising around the bottom. And yes, those Hercules and the other one is Argus, they are definitely used to explore hydrothermal vents. So for those who don't know what hydrothermal vents are, it's basically where there's cracks in the crust of the ocean floor, and heat is able to escape from the earth. So sometimes they're called black smokers because it really looks like a chimney almost under the water with these plumes of black smoke. So we definitely send the ROVs to explore there, to take temperature, to look at the sea life that's down there. And these are whole ecosystems that are very unique because most life needs the sun, needs photosynthesis to get energy from the sun. But these hydrothermal vents, these communities of organisms that live down there, can actually use chemicals from the water that comes out from the earth and can use that as an energy source instead of the sun. So pretty awesome communities, and we definitely send the remotely operated vehicles to explore those communities. All right, really cool question. Let me see, where should we go next? Here we go. Let's go to Mrs. Dillon's group. They're hanging out with us in Farmington, Missouri. Let me get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, Farmington? All right, who is up?
Me, Scott, how could we get one of these explorer jobs?
How can you get an explorer job? That is a really good question. I love that question. I'm glad you're thinking about it already. And you know what? The truth is, anybody can be a scientist. Anybody can be an explorer. In fact, at your age, you can already be a scientist and explorer. And all you have to do is be curious. Ask questions, want to know more about the world around you. Find something you're passionate about, research, talk to your parents, find a way to go and see some of these things. So even at your age, you can start your career as being a future scientist and explorer, which is really, really cool. And then honestly, nobody has the same story. A lot of people, a lot of scientists and explorers, they met someone, they saw a film, they read about someone, something kind of kickstarted something in their mind, got them excited, passionate, wanting to learn more. And then it led them to the career that they are on now. So, there's lots of different things you can take in school. Like I'd suggest things like biology and sciences are really important for becoming a scientist or an explorer. But there's lots of people who explore who didn't take sciences. So there's all kinds of different routes that you can take. Some people study marine life, but then end up studying things on land. You just don't know where where your career can take you. But the important thing they did is all along they asked questions, they learned things, they found people who liked the things that they did and studied with them. So it's really important if you want to become a scientist and explorer to be curious and be adventurous. So maybe at this age, you can't go all the way to Africa, but you could go on a micro adventure. And a micro adventure is just setting up a tent in your backyard and camping in your backyard, or going on a biodiversity hike in the park down the street. So you can go on adventures now. You can go on explorations now. You can ask questions now, just like a scientist. You don't have to wait until you're older. So I would suggest finding something you're excited about, you're passionate about, learning about it, researching it, and going after what you want. Sometimes you have to take a little bit of a risk as you get older and go after what makes you excited, what makes you passionate. So really good question. Mrs. Weaver's class, grade 6 is in Ocean City, New Jersey. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, Ocean City?
Good.
All right, who is on deck?
Me. Go ahead, buddy. Have you ever found anything valuable on a shipwreck?
All right, that's a very good question. I get that question a little bit. You might just hear the sound doubling up now. I'm just turning on the YouTube just to make sure there's if there's anyone with questions there that we're paying attention. So you might hear the sound double up for a second. There we go. Most shipwrecks that I've been diving on are shipwrecks that people have been diving on for many, many, many years. So unfortunately, some people like to take things from shipwrecks. They like to take, artifacts and maybe plates and other things that have been left behind, old cannonballs, whatever, and they like to keep them as trophies or something in their living room, which is a little bit disappointing because shipwrecks are places that should be left alone. In some cases, they're places where people have died. They really should just be left as they are. And it's a lot more exciting when you can dive on something and you can see a little bit of the history left behind as well. So unfortunately, most of the wrecks that I've been diving on, a lot of people have dived on them in the past and there's not as much left over. I was off the coast of North Carolina diving on a German submarine. So this is a German U-boat that was depth charged by the Coast Guard in 1942. It was 30 miles offshore, 118 feet deep in the water with a crazy current. And it was pretty amazing diving on this piece of history, this submarine sitting on the bottom of the ocean. And inside of that submarine, there were still some things left. So things left on the deck. There were air canisters left outside that would have been used to fire the torpedoes. So that was neat to see a few things left. But unfortunately, a lot of wrecks have been picked over. Now, I do some river diving in the river between Michigan and Ontario. And sometimes on that river, you can find old plates, old bottles, medicine bottles, things like that were dumped in the water, 60, 70 years ago. So it's really cool to find things like that when you're diving. Good question. Let's see, just looking on our online community, I can see we have a couple questions popping up on YouTube. So I want to give a shout out. Looks like Mrs. Evans is joining us from Oregon. Looks like Mrs. Horner is joining us from Indian Peaks in Colorado. And Mrs. Horner sent in a few questions, so let's pick one here. Okay, so a student's wondering about if there's a lot of people or scientists who go diving, and the answer to that question is yes, there's a lot. There's a lot of marine biologists who study all different things all over the world, and diving is a big part of their job. So they get out in the field, they go diving, they take pictures, they take notes, they take videos, they look at the health of the coral, they look at the health of the fish populations. Some people dive never getting into the water. So they drop those remotely operated vehicles into the water, the ROVs, and they pilot those around to go to places that humans can't go. Sometimes scientists will jump into submersibles, so submarines that can hold 2 or 3 people and dive down really deep. Obviously, as a person, you can only stay down there so long because there's only so much oxygen, and then it's hard to hold it in that long. Some people have to go to the bathroom, and when you're in a tiny little sub with just enough space for 3 people, you don't want to stay down too long. And then, you know what? A big part of being a scientist is outside of the water. So you spend your time in the field, but then you have to go into the laboratory. You have to look at your results, figure out what it means, write papers, publish and share them with the world. And then a really important part about being a scientist is sharing your work. So going to lectures, making videos. Science communication is so important to share your work with the planet, why it's important, get other people excited and realizing why it's important and what it means to them. So lots of different aspects to being a scientist other than just jumping right into the water. But being in the water is probably the most fun part. Mrs. Gale's class is joining us in Sharbot Lake here in Ontario. I know your microphone might not be cooperating with us today, so just give me a big wave at the camera. We got an infinity stones there. That's kind of cool. If you want to send a question via the chat sidebar, send me a question there, and I'll keep my eye out for that question. But in the meantime, let's go to Mrs. Gill's class in Cambridge, Ontario. You guys want to give us a huge shout out. Your microphone is on.
So Sophie.
Sorry, Joe, we have to go, but we want to thank you for all these amazing sessions.
So I don't know, could you hear us, Joe?
I did. Thank you so much. I'm glad you guys were able to hang out and do some of these adventures with us.
Yeah, we have to go. It's our music time right now. We have another teacher here, but we just wanted to say thank you for these amazing opportunities before we scooted out.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, guys. All right. We'll see you later. All right. Let's see. Mrs. Rhodes' class. Oh, no. Let me check in with Mrs. Rhodes' class. Are you guys still there? Oh, darn. Mrs. Rhodes' class had to duck out a little bit early today to switch to another event. So let's see. Let's see if we have another question online. Has anyone ever been scared or injured when diving? So the closest I've ever come to an injury while diving was I got stung by a jellyfish a couple of times, and really it wasn't a big deal. Sometimes they can be really translucent, hard to see in the water. One time, one brushed against my hand, so it was just a little sting. Another time, one brushed against my cheek. So really not a big deal. That's the closest I've ever come to an injury diving. And then animal attacks, no, never felt nervous underwater. Usually before every dive, I have little butterflies in my stomach, but I think that's more just excitement and knowing that, you know, anything can happen on a dive, so you have to be prepared. And I think that's a good thing because it means that I'm thinking about it and I am ready to go. So let's see. Let's swing back to a couple of our classrooms who are still here with us. Mrs. Finn's class.
Yeah.
Do you guys have another question?
So say-
This is a
Hold
three-part
on, wait,
question.
is he ready? You hear you?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
What's your favorite find in the ocean?
Next one.
Nice.
Go and go ahead.
Have you ever discovered a new species? And if yes, do you bring any back new discoveries?
Okay, lots of really cool questions. Let's see. Most interesting thing. Well, I would say every dive is awesome. There's interesting things about every dive, but one that's always stuck out with me was that diving in the off the coast of North Carolina, and you know, a German submarine on the bottom of the ocean. There's so much history there. It was a technical dive because there's so much ocean current and it was so deep that really it was a dive I got to use all of my training. And then when getting down there, got to see something pretty amazing. So that was definitely one of my favorite dives. Another one that really sticks out is in the Galapagos. And being in the Galapagos, sometimes you'd look around and see 10, 20, even 30 green sea turtles. All just going about their business, swimming along the bottom. So things like that, being surrounded by life underwater is so exciting and something I look forward to in every dive that I go on. Mrs. DeMaio's class, do you guys have another question?
Go ahead.
Have you ever seen something that you didn't know what it was before?
Oh yeah, all the time. And in fact, that brings me back a little bit to part of the other question that was just asked by Mrs. Finn's class, is finding a new species. So I haven't myself found a new species. Finding a new species is tricky. There's lots more for us to find. but it's not just as easy as, you know, taking a picture and saying, I found a new species. Sometimes it can take a year or two before it's verified. So different scientists from all over the world have to look at it, make sure it hasn't been discovered before, it hasn't been found before. So it's not easy to find a new species. It can take a year or two before it's actually confirmed that it is maybe a new species that you found. And then, yeah, so no new species that I found. And then, sorry, Mrs. DeMaio's class, what was the second part of that question?
I think it was just a curiosity about whether you'd seen a lot of things underwater that maybe you didn't know previously.
Gotcha.
So.
Yeah, so definitely, I definitely see things underwater that I don't know what they are. So that's why it's cool to dive with somebody else who knows the area well. A master diver or a dive instructor who, when you get to the surface, you can ask about some of the things you saw, show them their pictures. You can't be an expert everywhere in the world, which is why it's really cool when you go somewhere new to dive with somebody local, because then they can teach you about some of the things that you've seen that you might not know what they are. So for instance, that splendid toadfish in Cozumel, I didn't know what it was for sure, but when I got to the surface, the dive master was able to identify it.
Oh, that's security maintenance.
To clear that notification, I'm sorry to have it.
Mrs. Gale's class, I think your microphone's working.
You're live.
We gotcha.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
I can hear you. How's it going, boys and girls?
Yeah! Yes!
So Mrs. Gale's class is in Charlotte Lake, Ontario, and we're having mic trouble, but I think we got them now.
We did it.
If you guys have a quick question, take it.
How much of the 15% that has been mapped have you guys explored?
Okay.
Found
Good
it?
question. So, yeah, the answer is less than that, because it's a big area. You know, 15% of our ocean when 70% of our planet is made of water. So a lot of times we can go down to certain areas. We see it for a minute or two. We might take a quick video or picture, and that's it. So out of that 15% that's been mapped, I bet you humans have only actually been down there, whether with a remotely operated vehicle or maybe a submersible, maybe less than 1%, if that. I bet you it's less than 1%. Remember, mapping takes place from the ship. The ship has sonar on the bottom, and it scans across the bottom, a multi-beam sonar, to map parts of the ocean. So people aren't down there during the mapping part. They're actually just observing from the ship and taking that information. Mrs. Dillon's class, do you guys have a final question?
Yes, we do. It's a kind of a two-parter because it's a kind of a two quick ones.
Go for it.
What's the deepest you've ever been?
And
Yeah, what's the most unusual like creature you found underwater?
Okay, pretty cool. So the deepest I've ever been is 155 feet deep. And that was in Georgian Bay, diving on some shipwrecks that are pretty deep there. So about 155 feet deep. On average, I think I stick between 60 to 100 feet, but sometimes you go a little bit deeper when the ships, there's pretty cool things down there. So you have to go a little bit deeper to see them. So 155 feet deep. And then the weirdest thing that I've ever saw. It's a good one. Well, it's not weird, but when I was diving in a different part of Mexico, I'm sure you've all seen pufferfish before. And so pufferfish just look like a normal fish when they're swimming around, but when they're frightened or startled, they puff up into a ball of spikes. So the dive master we were with kind of waved his hand in front of one, and it puffed up and turned into this ball of spikes. And the reason they do that, they suck in a bunch of water, and then that way a predator can't swallow them. I don't think you'd want to swallow a ball of spikes. Well, neither would a shark or another predator. So that wasn't weird, but it was super, super cool. Yeah, I can't think of anything that just stands out as weird, but really cool things. Another time when I was in Fiji, I got to dive with a sea snake. So these are snakes that live in the water. They go on land to lay their eggs, but they hunt on the coral reef. And they're pretty darn cool. This is a black and white striped one. And they're very, very poisonous, strong venom that could definitely do some damage to a human. But they're also very calm, and you'd really have to work one up. You'd have to be like grabbing it before it would bite you. So I don't think I've seen anything that jumps out as weird, but I've seen so many cool things diving in lots of really cool places all over the world. Well, listen, boys and girls, it's been so much fun hanging out with you today. I'm sorry that our plans changed. We didn't get to hang out with Grace, but I do hope that you enjoyed hanging out today, learning a little bit about some of my ocean adventures. It was great to answer some of your questions. Remember, we do have more events coming up this week at nationalgeographic.org. And if you search Explorer Classroom, you might find some more camera spots. Other than that, it was a ton of fun. Hope to see you guys again soon. I'll just turn the mics on if you guys want to say goodbye quickly, and then we'll sign off for today. So thanks, everyone, for hanging out today. All right. We'll see ya. Thanks, everyone.